Hi, everybody. I'm Alexis Noriega. I'm a producer here at Forbes. I'm joined now by Matt Craig, a reporter who's going to help me break down the box office. So I want to kind of start off and I want to talk about Furiosa. So Furiosa had a big price tag on it. It was a $168 million budget and it was projected to kind of make around $45 million. Can you break down how the holiday weekend went for Furiosa?
Yes. I saw tracking around 42, $45 million opening for them. It only made about $32 million domestically, added another $32 million overseas, but that's way less than what we traditionally see Memorial Day weekend being a big release weekend on the movie calendar. Last year, Little Mermaid made like $119 million in this same weekend. 2 years ago, Top Gun Maverick made $160 million. So we're talking orders of magnitude more than Furiosa. Even in 2021, A Quiet Place Part 2 made in the high 50s, and that was still during the pandemic. So I think the point to make here, I mean, it is very disappointing for Warner Brothers. This was, I went to CinemaCon a few months ago, and this was like one of the movies they're rolling out as, their big releases for the year. So they're definitely disappointed with this. The movie will not make its money back for sure. But I think the bigger point to make here is that the movie's coming out, or I guess the lack thereof. I mean, anyone could tell you that Furiosa would not make as much money as The Little Mermaid or Top Gun Maverick or A Quiet Place Part 2. And so I think really the bigger point is the way that last year's actors and writers strikes have really chokeholded the supply line of movies coming out. And now the theme that you hear all the studios saying and all the theater chains saying is survive to 25. Like, we just have to get through this year. This year is going to be really rough. And there's a lot of big blockbuster movies that are coming out next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think a single movie this year has made $100 million in the box office. So I want you to talk a little bit more because you said that nobody was expecting Furiosa to make that much money. Can you tell me some factors why and what the reasonings why, like why audiences weren't running to the theaters to go see this movie?
Well, I just think that maybe there was a different expectation put on it because it was the big Memorial Day release. But it was never going to be a world conquering hit. I mean, it's a sequel, or I guess a prequel of a movie that came out in 2015, Mad Max Fury Road. And that movie only opened to about $45 million and made about $380 million overall. And so I think you really have to do like sort of a reverse inflation, if you will, of because over the last 10 years, fewer people are going to the movies, and so if a movie opened at $45 million 10 years ago, then maybe about $32 million, seems about right. That movie has a great reputation. It won 6 Oscars, and film lovers love it. But generally, prequels don't do as well as direct sequels. It's not the same cast. It's, not the same familiarity. And really, what I think is that this was just a movie for a certain audience, and it found that audience. But that audience was not enough to justify a $170 million budget. And that's, again, just the production budget, much more than that marketing. And so, yeah, I think ultimately the movie was just too expensive for what its audience was. Hey, the money is there on the screen. It looks really cool. It was definitely a fun movie to watch.
Good. Well, I want to talk about something a little bit different. I love talking about the numbers because we're Forbes, obviously, but I want to chat about how this movie was received. Like, what did critics and audience think about this release?
Yeah. I mean, I think many critics had the same impression that I did watching it, which is that this is a very good movie, but maybe not quite as good as Mad Max Fury Road. That movie, again, like I said, won 6 Oscars, has the reputation as being one of the great action movies, really, of the 21st century. If you want to get that grand about it, and I think this movie captures some of the same essence of that. Obviously, heavily action packed, intense. I think that certainly played a factor in why about 75% of audiences were male this weekend. It's certainly like a very testosterone heavy movie, right? But I think that to a certain extent, this movie was trying to do a little bit more exposition, I guess you could say, like lore building of the world. And really, I guess to me, and I know a lot of critics agreed that that was kind of the weaker parts of the movie. George Miller, the director, is one of the great action filmmakers of all time, and especially working today. And so the movie is best whenever there's the cars blazing and the flamethrowers going, and all the crazy action stuff happening.
Okay, so I want to pivot to the runner-up this weekend. I was surprised to kind of hear that this movie was runner-up to Furiosa. Tell me a little bit more about Garfield, and why you think it was competing so well with Furiosa.
Yeah, I think one of the staples remaining in the box office calendar right now is family entertainment. Family entertainment does really well. In general, I think it just plays by a different set of rules, right? I think oftentimes parents want to take their kids to a movie and care less about, how good is this movie going to be? It's the new movie that, people are talking about and people want to see. And so in general, family entertainment does well. The thing I would say, it opened to about $31 million domestically. That's pretty much just right in line with its tracking. I don't think anyone's, popping champagne on the Sony lot about this massive hit that they have. But the movie did what it was supposed to do here. It did really well internationally. It made about $66 million, so it's close to $100 million overall. It will eventually make its money back and earn some profits for Sony. And the other thing I will point out about Sony is that they're kind of like one of the arms dealers in Hollywood right now. They're not trying to prop up a streaming service, so they can go and sell this movie to, say, Netflix, for example. That's where a lot of their projects end up. And that's another way for them to kind of make their money back. So you're seeing how studios do have to be more creative about how to make money, right? Like The Fall Guy, for example, is already on digital video on demand, only a couple weeks after its release. So I think if you're Sony, you're probably really happy with the performance of Garfield.
So we're happy with performance. How are audiences feeling about the movie? Did it get reviewed well? Maybe not so much?
Yeah, I think for the most part, critics kind of killed this movie, and audiences mostly liked it. And I think that's actually not as unusual, really, in recent years for a lot of movies, but not unusual for movies with kids and families as the audience, because, as I mentioned, there's just kind of like a different set of criteria there that, for example, if you're 10 years old, what you're looking for from a movie is very different than a professional movie critic, right? And so it seems like a lot of the kids that see this movie are happy with it, and as I mentioned, it's doing well internationally as well as in the United States. So those are all good things. I mean, the success of a movie is judged on if people want to come out and see it. So in that instance, in that criteria, it's doing well. But I think critics, for the most part, are not hailing this as an Oscar contender.
Okay, well, can you tell me a little bit more about like the future of these movies? Do you think that they're going to continue to see sales? Are they going to gross more, maybe less? What are your thoughts?
Especially with these movies, I think they will kind of limp out for a few weeks. They'll try to hang on as long as they can, and then they'll try to come up with other ways to monetize them. As I mentioned, The Fall Guy is an example of a movie that opened well below expectations, and within 2 or 3 weeks, they're trying to sell it video on demand. And actually, it's continued to make some money at the box office, even whilst being offered on demand as well. That stinks if you're a theater owner, right? Because they don't see any of that money from video on demand. But I think what Hollywood is learning is really that this is kind of the right range for a movie that only reaches like 2 quadrants of audience. Like Hollywood talks about the 4-quadrant appeal, which is older and younger males, older and younger females. And I think if you have a movie that is only a 2-quadrant appeal, right? Like Mad Max, I said, is predominantly male, so that's 2 of the 4, right? Garfield, really only young people, not older people. Then okay, $25 to $45 million is kind of like your range for an opening, and maybe you're maxing out around $300 million total in your run, or more, 300 to 400. If that's the case, what's going to have to happen is these movies are going to have to get cheaper to make, because if that's the kind of range you can expect to bring in, then you're going to have to stop spending $170 million to make a movie like this. I think that the bigger trend is just people will come out for movies. We saw this last year with Barbenheimer. People will come out and see a movie, but they're not in the habit of going to the movies. You're very unlikely to find someone who's like, I want to go to the movies and I will figure out what I want to see when I'm there, or I'll take a chance on a movie that I don't know much about, or I don't know if I'll like. Now you pretty much have to sell someone fully on loving it before they even buy a ticket. And so again, if these movies that are kind of, again, appealing to some people, not appealing to others, maybe this is kind of the range that you can expect is the new normal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can definitely see how streaming has definitely changed the way we go see the movies. But I want to talk about the other films that were still in theaters this weekend. How did they do? What were the other films?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think that, like, so Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is kind of the case study right now that people are looking at and are like, why did this movie succeed? Because it's still hanging on, doing pretty well at the box office. It's past its expectations. It's going to be probably a moneymaker for Disney in a year when they really need it, because again, they don't have a lot of big releases this year. That's kind of the one that I'm looking at, and I'm sure people in the industry are looking at and saying, why did this appeal to so many people? Why was this one of those event movies that you feel like you had to come out and see? Um, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. The other movie that was kind of hanging on is If, the Imaginary Friends movie, directed by John Krasinski, and a star-studded cast. However, that kind of competes directly with Garfield for that kids' audience, and so the success of Garfield kind of ultimately, it's somewhat of a binary thing. Like, there's very rarely multiple kids movies in the market that are doing well. So as Garfield did well this weekend, the Imaginary Friends movie kind of went down. So again, we'll see. We have still to come this summer, like some huge movies that I'm sure will still be hits. Because to my point, I feel like people will come out for a big movie. The bigger point is that just there's not that many must see, can't miss releases really for the entire calendar year.
That's right. There's doesn't seem like there's another Barbenheimer in our midst, but I want you to talk a little bit more about what we can look forward to in the coming weeks and months. I think that there's some movies that could do some numbers in July.
Yes. Again, I think this is important to say because originally Marvel's Wolverine versus Deadpool movie was slated to come out this Memorial Day weekend. It got delayed because, again, actors and writer strikes harmed the back end of that production, and so it's coming out in mid-July, and that's going to be a huge movie. So, for example, if that movie had come out this weekend, Memorial Day, it probably would have opened, $100 million or something like that. And then, the narrative, everyone would be singing a different tune about, oh, people still love coming out to the movies, right? I just think it's way more case by case versus kind of this sea level that's relatively good for everyone, and then there's some that rise above or below. And now it's just like the sea level is so low. The baseline, you're not guaranteed anything, and you kind of have to earn all those dollars. So yeah, Deadpool versus Wolverine will be a huge movie for Marvel in July. Also, we're a couple weeks out from Inside Out 2. I think that's going to be a huge movie. And then a lot of people are predicting that Despicable Me 4, that July 4th weekend, might be the biggest movie of the entire year, which is kind of crazy to think that this is now like one of the biggest franchises, in all of Hollywood. But we could look at the end of the year and say Despicable Me 4 was the king to rule them all, the Barbie of the year.
I want to pivot one more time, and I just want to pick your brain a little bit. Con just wrapped up. I want to know what your biggest takeaways from that were. What are you excited about? What are you not so excited about?
Yeah, I think there's two movies that you have to talk about out of Con, and not necessarily as bright spots for the year. Honestly, they could be disasters. But Horizon Part 1, the movie directed, written, and starring Kevin Costner, reportedly put $38 million of his own money into this, and it's only part one of a four-part epic series. That's another Warner Brothers release. There's two of them coming out this summer, and it's a massive, massive risk. For example, if people don't like the first movie, if no one goes to see it, then the second one is like almost guaranteed to flop. That is going to be such a bellwether of not only Kevin Costner's current star power in Hollywood, but also, Warner Brothers, honestly, their success for the entire year, I think depends on that one. An even bigger risk, you could say, is Megalopolis, which is the movie directed by Francis Ford Coppola, because reportedly, and again, no one's really been able to pin this down, but he may have spent like over $100 million of his own money to make this. So it's kind of like a passion project, 40 years in the making, and it had very mixed results at Cannes. I would say mostly negative, but some people said it was genius in a kind of messy, confusing way. And that movie does not have a distributor yet, so we actually don't know when we're going to be able to see it. It has like a sort of a limited engagement with IMAX set up, and that seems like almost like a career achievement award for Francis Ford Coppola, who of course he made The Godfather and he made Apocalypse Now, and those movies, were thought to be kind of runaway disasters until they, turned out to be huge hits. So of course, maybe hoping for a similar outcome here. I think it's unlikely based on what I've read and what I've heard, but I haven't seen the movie, and I don't know when I will get a chance to see the movie or if I will. So it might end up being kind of like the most expensive museum piece of all time. But I think that those were the two movies that you have to talk about coming out of Cannes for sure.
Matt, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. I really hope to talk to you soon.
Always fun to talk movies. Appreciate it.